If I had known then what I know now, my projects would not have only looked neater, I would have been able to finish them in half the time as well. Hi everyone, my name is Norman, I run the blog nimbleneedles.com and I want you to become a better knitter, and that's why today's video is all about knitting tips and secrets I wish I had known when I started knitting. Did you know that a purl stitch is a mirror inverted knit stitch and it will look exactly the same on the other side? And did you know that you can knit garter stitch by knitting across all rows or purling across all rows? And did you know that there's not only one, not two, not three, but at least 4 different ways to produce said purl stitch? Well, then keep on watching. As a knitter with over 30 years of experience, I finished quite a lot of beautiful projects, but there were also, well, let's not call them failures, let's call them learning opportunities. And when I look back, a lot of these detours to becoming a proficient knitter might not have been necessary if only someone told me the right things. With this video, I want to fill this gap and recount some of those truly eye-opening moments, specific things I learned about knitting that were real game changers. And you know, not inspirational fillers like you need to learn to relax or practice a lot. No, specific techniques and knitting tools that really made all the difference. Now, this video comes with a little challenge. I want you to comment right now and share with all the other knitters watching what kind of eye-opening things you learned about knitting. You know, these kind of eureka moments where you shake your head and wonder why on earth did you do it the difficult or less neat way all these years. Anyway, let's start with my knitting tips, and remember to like this video right now to support my work. Number 1, there are almost always at least 2 ways to achieve the exact same results. Knitting is a bit like visiting your friends. You can walk, take the car, ride your bicycle, run, walk backwards, walk once around the block before you ring the doorbell, and so on. And knitting is pretty similar. I'm not sure I'm even aware of a single knitting technique where there isn't at least one alternative way to do it. Let's show you some examples. You can knit a purl stitch like this, so the continental way. Or you knit it the Norwegian way with yarn in back. Or there is of course the English way. Or you can reverse knit the wrong side by going in the other direction. And then of course there is combination knitting, which will produce a slightly different purl stitch. Or let's take knit 2 together. You can knit it like this, the traditional way. Or you knit one, slip it back to the left needle, pass over, and slip it back to the right needle. There is your knit 2 together. You can knit a cable like this. So you slip 1 stitch to a cable needle, knit 1 stitch, and then you knit the stitch from the cable needle. Or you knit a cable stitch without a cable needle. Or you can even knit a cable by coming from the back like this. Will produce the exact same cable. Or you can decrease on the right side with SSK. Or you decrease on the wrong side with SSP. Or you slip 1 stitch to a cable needle, then slip that stitch to the left needle, slip the stitch back to the left needle, and then knit these 2 stitches together. And see, you created the exact same decrease. Can you spot the difference? Now, nobody in their right mind would probably decrease like this, but I hope you can see my point. And the concept is even larger than that. You can knit in the round on double-pointed knitting needles, or if that is too difficult, you can knit in the round using magic loop. Or you can knit a flat project and join it in the round using mattress stitch. Or you could even double knit a project to create a tubular object on straight needles. So what I'm saying is, if you are really struggling with a technique despite trying for more than 2 minutes, then go visit my blog or Google it and look if you can find an alternative way to knit it. And I promise you, you will find something. Number 2, everything in knitting comes in pairs. When you start out knitting, you learn how to cast on, how to knit the knit stitch, and how to bind off. And then you might learn a simple increase and a simple decrease along the way. Say a backward loop, increase, and knit 2 together. And no hate there, you can finish some truly amazing projects with these simple techniques. But once you understand that there is a corresponding left-leaning decrease to a knit 2 together and why it matters, it will open up a whole new world. You can suddenly knit decreases that will look exactly the same on both sides. But it's not just knit 2 together and SSK that form a pair. There are also corresponding decreases for the wrong side. Instead of knitting a knit 2 together, you can also knit a purl 2 together on the wrong side. Instead of knitting knit front and back, KFB, you could also do a purl front and back on the wrong side. And often you will find that with your individual tension and technique, one version looks better for you. This is an SSK and this is SSP. And see how much neater SSP looks for me, despite being the exact, technically speaking, they are the exact same stitches. Maybe you are a Portuguese knitter and purling is so much easier for you. I know knitters who knit every project in the round from the wrong side and then turn it inside out to wear it because they hate the knit stitch. So, understanding that almost all knitting techniques come in pairs will really help you to make things easier and neater. For the advanced knitters, yes, there is a way to bind off on the left side of a project. Google it and you will be amazed, or comment below if I should record a video doing that. Number 3, there is more than just one style of knitting. I learned knitting from my family, a bit in school, and the rest from books. But those were all continental knitters. You know, back in the 80s, there was no YouTube, no Facebook or whatever. You rarely got in contact with knitters from the other end of the world. So I just, knitted my continental style with yarn held in the left hand. So I think I was around 25 when I learned that there's something like English throwing, where you hold the yarn in the right hand. And even later, until I discovered Portuguese knitting. And I feel this is such an important topic that deserves to be in the spotlight. Just the other day, one of my viewers commented that they have a treatise in their right hand and they wanted to make the switch to continental knitting because here you use the left hand quite a lot. And you know, our bodies, they all work differently and we all have our own history. And sometimes the way everyone else in our family or your local knitting group knits is not the best for you. Now, I found that continental knitting is, for at least now, my preferred way of knitting. But that is more or less luck, I guess. And I wish more beginner guides would share that there are different styles of knitting. So do me a favor right now and comment where you are from and what kind of style you knitted. And of course, again, do add whatever you wish you had known when you started knitting. Number 4, a lot of complicated things are actually fairly easy. When you are a beginner, you probably struggle with your first little pot holder or coaster, and then you see the projects of a more experienced knitter, and it can be intimidating. How did they do it? It sure must be complicated. And you know, you can't even get a purl stitch straight and their stuff looks like it was bought in a store. To be sure, there are certainly super advanced techniques, you know, like intarsia in the round or so. But take the cable stitch for example. You just slip stitches to a cable needle, knit 2 stitches, and then knit stitches from the needle. It's super easy and doesn't involve any complicated stitches at all. It's just knit stitches. Or take double knitting or the basic brioche stitch. All these techniques don't really require you to know a lot more than a knit and a purl stitch, but because you employ an ingenious little trick, you get outstanding results. I wish I hadn't waited so long until I started my first cable project. And even for a lot of complicated things like lace, there are usually super simple beginner patterns available. There's no need to start with an Estonian lace shawl where you have 400 stitches on the needle and a 48 stitch repeat that changes every row. For example, on my blog, I have a super simple lace bookmark I'm very sure any beginner past their first 2 or 3 projects will be able to finish. So my advice is really don't be intimidated by things that may look complicated. Find a small pattern and just give it a try, because that's how you grow and that's how you improve. Knitting tip number 5, knit with different needle sizes. Most beginners probably start out with one pair of needles and some simple worsted wool or acrylic yarn and start a scarf or something. Nothing wrong with that. But then they start the next scarf in a rib stitch and suddenly things look a bit weird. And I wish I had known that different knitting stitch patterns should be knit with different needle sizes. So if you have the cuff of a sock and then some stockinette stitch, knit the ribbing with one needle size smaller. Or if you have some fair aisle section and you want to maintain the same gauge, knit this part with one needle size bigger. Different techniques and knitting methods produce a different fabric, and if you want a really uniform look, you need to change needle sizes. I have a pattern for a headband here on my channel, and it uses altogether 3 needle sizes, so everything looks neat. A small size for the ribbing, one size bigger for the stockinette stitch, and yet again one size bigger for the fair aisle. Number 6, lifted increases. I think it was the amazing Julie from Little Cotton Rabbits that introduced me to lifted increases years and years ago. Before it was all make one left and make one right for me. Now these increases sure have their uses, but a KLL knit left loop or a KRL knit right loop are just so much more invisible for stockinette stitch. Can you spot the KLL here? There it is. Further down the road, I also learned about PLL and PRL, which you can use to increase twisted stitches and twisted ribbings in a super invisible way. And you know, as a beginner, knitting into a stitch 1 or 2 rows below sounds intimidating. How do you do that? But I honestly believe that a lifted increase is actually easier to knit than make one left. First of all, it is so much less confusing. By the way, here is a little memory hook. For a make one left, which is a left-leaning increase, the picked up strand needs to lean towards the left. And for a make one right, which is a right-leaning increase, the picked up strand needs to lean towards the right. But setting that aside, I also believe that KLL is much easier to knit than trying to fiddle your needle through a make one right. So I really wish I had known this when I started knitting. But there's more yet. You can also use lifted stitches to knit jogless stripes in the round or use them to close holes. There are just so many amazing applications. Knitting tip number 7, spin matters. These days, very few knitters spin their own yarn. We buy it at a local yarn shop or online, and most of us know little or nothing about the ways a spinner can influence the properties of a yarn. There's a big difference between a single ply, a 2-ply, and an 8-ply yarn. Not only in terms of durability, how easy it peels, and so on, but also in terms of how the finished project will look like. And I really urge you to go through your stash and knit some swatches. Most knitters will have a scrap box and just pick some different yarns, maybe a 2-ply and an 8-ply DK yarn, one with a really high twist and so on, and then knit some swatches. And I want you to knit plain stockinette stitch, ribbing, and if you know how to, some lace or cables. A couple of rows each are enough, and then compare those swatches. And I promise you, it will make you realize why some of your knitting may look a bit wonky or different than usual. The way a yarn is spun has such a huge impact on the way a finished project will look like. And when I was a beginner, I just focused on the color and later maybe on the material, but never on the ply. For the longest time, I was wondering why sometimes my 2x2 ribbing wouldn't look neat. The second column of knit stitches always ended up a bit wider, especially when I was knitting in the round, but not always. Or my stockinette stitch didn't show these V's, but more like one continuous line with right slanting bits. And while certainly not in all cases, the reason often can be traced back to the way the yarn was spun. And it's not even spinning alone, the way you wind and unwind your yarn and even your individual knitting technique can add twist to your yarn and influence the way your knitting looks. Number 8, learn how to read your knitting. When you start out knitting, you cling to a pattern like it was a lifeline. And that's okay, that's what they're for. But in most modern Western knitting patterns, one does very little in the return rows or rounds. So in most cases, you just knit every stitch the way it appears. If it has a little bump around its base, you purl it. And if it has a V at its base, you knit it. Now, obviously, that's just generalization, but being able to pinpoint at a glance where you are in your knitting and compare it with your pattern is such a vital skill, and I wish I had learned this much earlier. And talking about those patterns, please read patterns all the way to the end before you start, and don't skip any sections because it seems like blah blah blah. We often, as knitters, we often do some little adjustments as you knit along, and if you pick a different cast on or a different selvage stitch because it seems easier to you, or you feel it's more beautiful, or that's how you've always done it, and then later you need to seam things or pick up stitches, then you may be screwed. Just one example, but please read those patterns. And this brings me directly to the next pattern issue. Trust your patterns if you are a beginner. Now, I released quite a lot of patterns on my blog, and sure, there's always the chance that there's a little typo or maybe even a wrong stitch hiding somewhere. And I always love it when my readers reach out and help me perfect my patterns. But there's almost always test knitters involved, so the chance that something is fundamentally wrong is usually rather low. So if you are a beginner, don't automatically think there must be something wrong with the pattern because things don't add up. And if you do believe there is indeed a mistake, don't change the pattern yourself. Rather, ask people online or reach out to the designer. Knitting tip number 11, learn how to fix mistakes. One of my previous videos was all about fixing mistakes with 10 different techniques. So I want to keep things short here. When you do a mistake, and we all make one here and there, there's usually a super easy way to fix things without unraveling everything. And it's super important, and it will save you so much time and keep you from becoming frustrated that you learn how you can fix a dropped stitch using a crochet hook, or how you can close a gap or a little hole, and so on. At the same time, it is totally okay to unravel a project. Maybe you don't like the way the finished project looks on you. Or there is this unfinished project gathering dust in your project bag and it has been lying there for a year or two. You know it, I know it, and nobody's probably going to finish that project ever. So unravel it and use the yarn for something else, and I promise you this will actually be a bit liberating. Knitting is as much a process as it is a product. Sometimes you just need to accept that you have to go through a number of iterations before you are perfect. For example, if I pick up a new yarn base for my socks, which actually happens very rarely, I always knit one sample sock. I don't actually knit a swatch. I want my socks to have a perfect fit, so I take a good guess based on previous projects and knit one full sock. I don't intend to wear this sock, and then I take a look. to find those little adjustments I need to make to get the perfect fit. Maybe I need to cast on 4 more stitches, maybe I need to decrease 2 more stitches around the gusset, maybe I can start the toes 2 rows earlier and so on, and then I unravel it. So mistakes are super easy to fix, but unraveling also has its uses. Knitting tip number 13, ask why. A couple of weeks ago I published a video on how to knit neat edges, and one viewer commented something like, "Norman, I have been knitting for 30 years and was taught to always slip the first stitch of every row, and now I know why. Thank you." A lot of people struggle with things like brioche decreases and increases. But when you understand that brioche knitting is actually a form of double knitting, these super complicated increases and decreases will suddenly make sense. Try to understand why you are doing something instead of just repeating what someone else tells you. Knitting tip number 14, learn how to read charts. I don't know how many knitters have asked me to provide written instructions for those few complicated patterns where I only supply charts, and my answer is almost always, I won't do it because written instructions would be too complicated. Now, I am a big fan of written instructions for small projects, and very few of my patterns actually have a chart. But if there is a lace project, cables or Fair Isle, then a chart makes so much more sense. And you know what? I do have a video here on YouTube on how to read charts, and so many people commented on it or wrote to me that with my tutorial they finally understood it. And you know what's the key? You need to understand that a chart is nothing mathematical. Instead, you need to treat it like a different language that uses symbols instead of letters. Sounds complicated? Well, you learned that a P stands for a purl as well. So I am 100% sure that you can also learn that a little dot stands for a purl stitch. And once you wrap your mind around it, you will be able to open a whole new world of knitting patterns. So learn it. Number 15, invest in good lighting. This here is a little craft light. And you know what? For too many years I never bought one because I thought that for $10 or $15, these couldn't be any good. And I felt it made me feel like a cliche knitting granny from one of those movies where every experienced knitter can spot that the director never ever saw anyone knitting. And you know what? It's one of my biggest regrets that I didn't buy one earlier, especially if you like to knit with dark colors. No joking here, it's almost been the best investment I ever made in knitting. I'll put a link in the description below in case you want to buy one as well. And talking about tools, I wish I had known that circular knitting needles are not just for knitting in the round. Here in Germany we call these super long straight needles jacket needles, Jackennadeln. And for whatever reason I thought if you want to knit a sweater you have to do it on these needles. Now to be sure you can do it, but it's so much easier on circular needles. And there are actually tons of knitting techniques like a 2-colored brioche stitch where you actually need both ends of the needle. So now I have all these straight needles and they're just gathering dust because they're just so cumbersome. Knitting tip number 17. Buy interchangeable knitting needles. I really wish I had known when I started knitting that there are interchangeable knitting needles. Now to be fair, I don't think they actually existed when I started, but I think I bought my first set like 15 years ago or so. Before that, I just bought a new pair of circulars, fixed circulars for each project, and I wasted so much money doing that. Now obviously these sets can be pricey and I don't believe you should invest $150 to knit your first pot holder. But after your third or fourth project you will get a good feeling if knitting is your thing, and then buying one of these interchangeable knitting needle sets will be one of the best investments you can make. Number 18, blocking matters. When I started knitting, a lot of my projects looked a bit unrefined and I always wondered how the other knitters got their sweaters and shawls look so nice. Well, the answer is blocking. These days it might be obvious, but in old knitting patterns there was almost never a sentence like, and after you bound off all stitches, block your work. To be sure, these patterns were so cryptic that 3 sweaters would fit on the same page, but that's a different story. Anyway, learn how to block your finished work. It's super simple and it will make all the difference. Knitting tip number 19. Do knit swatches or don't. And here's one important thing. Please knit swatches. As a beginner, I know you're full of energy, you're motivated, and you want to start on that pattern right away. The last thing you want to do is knit a useless little swatch you need to unravel or throw away. But trust me, trying to get gauge is such a vital step and it will save you so much frustration in the long run. Don't skip it, I can't stress this enough. Knitting a swatch is the only way you can use a pattern or a chart. Now, there is a twist and it only applies to advanced knitters. I rarely knit swatches because once you understand the limitation of swatches, you will find out that it's almost impossible to knit the perfect swatch because most patterns round the gauge up or down, there are no half stitches, and there is no standardization on how much you need to stretch your swatch and so on. Some patterns measure the gauge on the finished item, which will behave differently than your 10 by 10 inch swatch no matter what you do. So I mostly measure my work in progress, try it on if that is possible. My swatch, and I do knit one, just tells me how a fabric behaves in general, how stretchy it is and what happens after washing. Number 20, take breaks and stretch out. When I started knitting, I would knit for 4 or 6 hours straight. I was so hooked. Can you? That sounds like crochet. I was so needle. Can you say that? Anyway, I was young and my body forgiving. Do the same in the second half of your life and your body will complain. And I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of obvious. Sitting in the same or slouching in the same posture for 4 hours, squinting at tiny little stitches in front of your eyes, cramping your finger, it kind of sounds like the most stupid idea ever. But when you start knitting, few people actually tell you how important it is to take breaks and stretch out, watch your posture and so on. And you know, once you have that carpal tunnel syndrome or your chronic tendonitis, things are often too late and the recovery is long and painful. So take breaks. And here is a little bonus tip. When I started knitting, indie yarn dyeing wasn't really a thing. But even today, a lot of beginners are not aware of the amazing yarn options you may find outside your big craft stores. I have a very detailed list of indie yarn dyers on my blog. In case you're interested, it has, I don't know, well over 150 entries by now. I'll put a link in the description below, but only click on it at your own risk. Now, I'm a self-diagnosed yarn snob, but still, even if you are a beginner, I recommend investing in quality over quantity. Don't buy the cheapest needles or the cheapest acrylic yarn available. I'm aware that not everyone has the same financial possibilities, but there are thrift stores where you can buy old sweaters and unravel the yarn, and you'd be amazed how many knitting needles turn up in yard sales and so on. And you know, I'm not saying you need those gilded knitting needles and only knit with cashmere. That's nonsense. But cheap needles may break while you're knitting, and cheap yarn might not produce anything you want to wear. And then in there, investing $5 or $10 more into your project will ensure that you will cherish your finished project for a decade and sometimes even more instead of just a month. And really, we are not talking about a skein for $30. I'm talking about the difference between a super big 1,000 yard skein for $2 or a nice quality yarn that may cost $5 for 100 grams. Anyway, that was my list of things I wish I had known when I started knitting. Please like this video if you enjoyed watching, comment with your questions and your feedback, and of course consider subscribing to my channel in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.